Stop what you're doing. Look around you. You've heard the whispers, the local legends that haunt the backroads and the abandoned places of Indiana. But tonight, we move past the whispers. We are stepping into the deep shadows of the Hoosier State, to the cemeteries where the count is always wrong, the desolate farmlands stained by unspeakable acts, and the institutions where the patients never truly left. These are the 5 most disturbing, bone-chilling true horror stories from Indiana. If you are brave enough to face what hides in the heartland, like this video, and let us know which story terrified you the most in the comments below. Don't look behind you. Let's begin. In the annals of paranormal investigation, there are stories, and then there are case files. Stories are campfire tales, passed down and embellished, their edges smoothed by time. They are legends, folklore. Case files are different. They are collections of cold, hard documents. They contain police reports, hospital records, psychological evaluations, and signed affidavits from sworn officers of the law. The haunting on Carolina Street in Gary, Indiana, is not a story. It is a case file. It is, perhaps, the most thoroughly documented case of demonic possession and infestation in modern American history. This wasn't a centuries-old farmhouse with a local legend. This was a small, unassuming rental home in 2011, and the terror that unfolded within its walls was so profound, so immediate, and so verifiably witnessed that it would pull in the Department of Child Services, the Gary Police Department, the local hospital, and the Catholic Church, culminating in a church-sanctioned exorcism. The official file begins with LaToya Ammons and her 3 children, a 12-year-old daughter, a 9-year-old son, and a 7-year-old son. In November of 2011, they moved into the house at 3860 Carolina Street. It was a simple, 1-story, white-sided house. It was a fresh start. But the house, it seemed, had been waiting. The first sign, according to Ammons' testimony, was innocuous. Then, bizarre. Swarms of large black flies began to appear on their screened-in porch. This was the dead of winter in Indiana. The ground was hard, the air was frigid, yet, day after day, the flies would return, crawling over each other, dying, and replenishing their numbers, despite the family's frantic attempts to swat and spray them. The flies, however, were just the herald. Soon after, the family began hearing footsteps. Heavy, creaking footsteps, like a large man pacing the floors. They would hear them ascend the basement stairs, one slow, deliberate tread at a time. Then they would hear the sound of the basement door opening, and the footsteps would continue into the kitchen. This was impossible. The family kept the basement door locked, a heavy padlock on the outside. They would check it, and the lock would be undisturbed. The activity escalated, graduating from auditory to physical. In the living room, a big black shadow would be seen moving, a shape that seemed to drink the light from the room. It would hover, then vanish. At night, the children, who shared a bedroom, began to talk to someone who wasn't there. LaToya would hear them in conversation, with a voice she couldn't make out. Her youngest son, the 7-year-old, began speaking to an imaginary friend who would tell him how he was going to die. The house was no longer just making noises, it was becoming hostile. The activity began to focus, with terrifying precision, on the children. Played Ras, Ammons, and her mother, Rosa Campbell, would later recount the first major event of possession. The 12-year-old daughter was in her room when she began to feel unwell. She was suddenly lifted from her bed and slammed against the wall over and over, as if by an invisible force. She was left bruised, terrified, and gasping for air. This was no longer a haunting. This was an assault. The family, deeply religious, sought help from their church and local clairvoyants. They were told the house was infested with over 200 demons. They were advised to clean the home with ammonia and bleach, to anoint the doors with oil and to pray. They did. The house, in return, lashed out. The 9-year-old son became a primary vessel. His personality would vanish, replaced by something ancient and filled with rage. His eyes would bulge, and a creepy, demonic smile, as his mother called it, would spread across his face. He would speak in a deep, guttural voice that was not his own, saying things a 9-year-old could not possibly know, threatening the family, telling them they would all die there. The local community was skeptical. The Ammons family was poor, and stories of hauntings are often seen as cries for attention or a cover for mental illness. The family was, by all accounts, desperate. They were not sleeping. They were not eating. They were living in a state of constant adrenalized terror. They built a small altar in their living room, covered in crosses and religious icons, but it did little to stop the attacks. The turning point came when the situation became a public matter. The children's behavior, their grades, and their physical state had deteriorated so much that the Department of Child Services was called to investigate the family for potential abuse or neglect. This is where the case file becomes truly chilling. Valerie Washington was the CPS case manager assigned to the Ammons family. She was a professional. She was a skeptic. Her job was not to hunt ghosts. Her job was to protect children. On April 19, 2012, she visited the home along with a nurse to interview the family. She was there to assess the children's welfare, to see if LaToya Ammons was fabricating a story, perhaps suffering from a shared delusion. What she witnessed, she would later state in her official report, defy all rational explanation. During the interview, the 9-year-old son began to growl. His eyes rolled back into his head, and that same horrible smile spread across his face. He began cursing at Washington and the nurse in his deep, unnatural voice. The 7-year-old son then joined in, his face contorting. Valerie Washington, according to her own testimony, was unnerved but chalked it up to a severe behavioral problem, a performance for the social worker. Then the 9-year-old stood up. He walked over to the wall, and he walked up it. He didn't run. He didn't climb. In front of Valerie Washington and the nurse, the 9-year-old boy, in a state of complete calm, placed his feet on the wall and walked backwards up to the ceiling. He then flipped over, landing perfectly on his feet on the floor, and showed no memory of the event. Washington and the nurse fled the house in terror. The nurse, who also witnessed the event, refused to ever return to the property and would not speak of it again. Valerie Washington, however, had to file a report. She documented the incident, stating she was scared and that the event was worldly, not normal. The official CPS report now contained a documented account of a 9-year-old boy defying the laws of gravity, witnessed by 2 trained, professional observers. The case was escalated. The children were taken to the local hospital for a psychological evaluation. The 9-year-old son, while in a small examination room with his mother and a psychiatrist, again became violent. He began growling, his eyes rolling. He cursed at the hospital staff, threatening to kill them. It took 3 adults to restrain the 60-pound child. But the most compelling witness to all of this was not a family member or a social worker. It was Gary Police, Captain Charles Austin. Austin was a 36-year veteran of the police force. He was a tough, no-nonsense cop who had seen everything. He told his superiors he was a skeptic, and he thought this was a scam to get a new apartment. He was called to the home to investigate the CPS claims. He went, expecting to find a family in distress, perhaps a carbon monoxide leak, or a hoax. He visited the home with several other officers. At first, all was quiet. Then, his equipment began to fail. His police radio, which had worked perfectly on the drive over, became overwhelmed with static, as if a massive electrical field had just been activated. Later, his car's driver's seat began to move back and forth on its own. He recorded his interviews with the family. When he played the tapes back at the station, a voice that was not present in the room, a low, whispering voice, could be heard on the audio, saying things like, "You're all done, and he's coming." Captain Austin, a man who had built his career on facts, was now confronted with something that had no place in his world. He began photographing the house. The photos, when developed, were filled with strange anomalies. White, shadowy figures appeared in the windows and doorways, shapes that were not visible to the naked eye when the photos were taken. In the basement, Austin and his team found a strange, wet substance dripping from the walls, an oily residue that had no discernible source. They found a small footprint on the stairs, but it seemed to lead up. The event that finally broke Captain Austin's skepticism was a simple one. He had left the house, convinced he was dealing with something not of this world. He was driving home, his mind reeling from the radio interference and the photographs, when he spoke to his partner. He told him about the case, and his partner scoffed. As Austin pulled into his own driveway, his garage door began to open and close, over and over, on its own. It had never done that before. It has never done it since. Captain Charles Austin, the 36-year veteran, was now a believer. He wrote a formal report. He told the Indianapolis Star, in a statement that would make headlines, "I am a believer. I witnessed these things. I don't know what it was, but it was something." The police department, now convinced of the family's danger, reached out to the only authority they believed could handle the situation: the Catholic Church. The Diocese of Gary was, like all modern branches of the church, deeply skeptical. They did not perform exorcisms lightly. The process is long, bureaucratic, and requires overwhelming proof that the affliction is demonic, not psychological. They sent Father Michael Maginot to investigate. Father Maginot was a pastor, not a full-time exorcist. He, too, was a skeptic. He met with the family. He reviewed the police reports, the CPS documents, and the hospital records. He interviewed Captain Austin. He performed a blessing of the house, which he said was met with an immediate, violent reaction from the unseen forces within. Lights flickered, doors slammed, and a profound cold filled the rooms. He became convinced. He petitioned the bishop, and after reviewing the mountain of evidence, the Bishop of Gary gave his official sanction for a minor rite of exorcism. The first exorcism was performed on the house itself. Father Maginot described a building that was alive with hatred. He described seeing the big black shadow that Latoya had spoken of, and sensing a presence of profound evil that was intelligent and ancient. But the house was not the source. The house was just a focal point. The entities were attached to the family, specifically to Latoya and her children. Father Maginot determined that Latoya herself was the target of a hex, and that the demons, which he numbered at over 200, were using her family as a way to destroy her. The final exorcism was performed on Latoya Ammons herself. It was not a single, cinematic event. It was a grueling, hours-long ritual, conducted in a small chapel, attended by 2 police officers and a CPS worker. Father Maginot recounted that during the rite, Latoya would slip into unconsciousness, only to awaken with a demonic face, speaking in tongues, her body contorting. She spoke of a vision she was being shown, of her children being murdered. The entity spoke through her, telling Maginot that he was weak, that he would fail. The priest commanded the entities to reveal their names. He described a long, painful process of binding and casting out, one by one, the legion that had taken root in the Ammons family. He described the smell of sulfur filling the room and a bone-chilling cold that had no natural source. After 3 separate, exhausting rites, it was over. The family was broken, traumatized, but free. They moved out of the house on Carolina Street immediately. They never returned, and, according to all reports, the activity ceased. The hex was broken. What happens when a case file is closed? The official reports are put in a box, stamped, and filed away in a dusty archive. The house on Carolina Street became a dark tourist attraction, a piece of local, terrifying lore. It was eventually bought by Zach Baggins, a paranormal investigator and host of the show Ghost Adventures, who, after experiencing his own terrifying encounters, had the house demolished in 2016. He claimed the house was a portal, too dangerous to be left standing. The story of 3860 Carolina Street is over, but the case file remains. It is a stack of paper, thick with official letterhead, police insignia, and medical terminology. It is a collection of impossible facts, witnessed by unimpeachable sources. It is the official record of a war fought in a tiny one-story rental home between a terrified family and an evil that the modern world is not supposed to believe in. But in Gary, Indiana, the police believe, the doctors believe, and the church knows. Horror is a word we use for the dark, for the things that jump from the shadows, for the monsters with claws and fangs that are not of our world. We use it to explain the unexplainable. But there is another kind of horror, a quiet, creeping horror that is born not in the supernatural, but in the mundane. It is a horror that wears a human face, that lives in a crowded house on a normal street, and that flourishes not in the dark of night, but in the full, unforgiving light of day. It is the horror of the human heart and its capacity for cruelty. And this is the story of Sylvia Likens. It is, perhaps, the purest example of that horror. Because the monsters in this story were not demons. They were neighbors. They were children. And the darkest, most terrifying place in the state of Indiana in 1965 was not a crumbling asylum or a forgotten cemetery. It was a simple, wood-paneled basement at 385 East New York Street, Indianapolis. Sylvia was 16 years old. In photos, she has a soft, tentative smile. She was, by all accounts, a quiet girl, perhaps a bit too trusting, a bit too eager to please. She was a sister. Her younger sister, Jenny, was 15 and frail, her body weakened by polio, her steps supported by a brace. Their parents were carnival workers, nomads by trade, chasing the seasons and the small-town crowds. In the summer of 1965, they needed a place for their daughters to stay while they traveled. They found Gertrude Banaszewski. Gertrude was a thin, asthmatic woman, a 37-year-old divorcee drowning in a life she could not control. She lived in a tiny, falling-apart rental house with her own brood of 7 children, ranging from her pregnant teenage daughter, Paula, down to her youngest. The house was chaotic, impoverished, and filled with the stale air of desperation. For $20 a week, 10 for each. Likens girl, Gertrude agreed to take Sylvia and Jenny in. It was supposed to be a safe harbor. It became the center of the storm. The horror did not begin all at once. It never does. For the first few days, it was just a crowded, unhappy house. Sylvia and Jenny shared a room, did their chores, and waited for their parents' letters. But the $20 payment from the Likens' father was late. It was only a few days late, but in Gertrude's world, that $20 was the difference between groceries and hunger. That late payment was the trigger. It was the excuse she needed. Gertrude, a woman who felt utterly powerless in her own life, had just been handed 2 human beings over whom she had complete and total authority. Her resentment, her poverty, her chronic pain, her bitterness at the world, it all found a single, convenient target: Sylvia. It began, as it so often does, with an accusation. Gertrude accused Sylvia of stealing, of being loose, of telling lies. She used these accusations as justification for the first punishment. It was a slap, a shove, then a beating. Gertrude was not strong, but she was creative, and she was a leader. She deputized her own children. She told them Sylvia was a bad influence. She gave them permission to punish her. Paula, the pregnant 17-year-old, and her 10-year-old brother John Jr. became Gertrude's most eager lieutenants. This was the first critical psychological shift. The abuse was normalized. It became a part of the house's daily routine, as common as cooking dinner or watching television. Sylvia, confused and terrified, tried to appease them. She took the beatings. She apologized for crimes she never committed, hoping that if she was just better, just quieter, it would stop. But it didn't stop. It escalated. Because Gertrude Baniszewski did something else. She invited people. The house on East New York Street became a gathering place for the neighborhood kids. They would come over after school, drawn by the chaos, the lack of supervision, and Gertrude, the ringmaster of this grim circus, offered them a new, dark form of entertainment. She would gather the children, her own, and the neighbors, like Richard Hobbs and Coy Hubbard, and she would point at Sylvia. "She needs to be taught a lesson," she would say, and the children, in a terrifying display of mob psychology, would oblige. They were just kids, some as young as 10. But in that house, they became something else. They became a crowd, and a crowd does not have a conscience. They would hit Sylvia. They would punch her, kick her. It became a game, a ritual. The price of admission to Gertrude's house was to participate, to hurt Sylvia. Where was Jenny during all of this? Jenny was forced to watch. Her polio, her crutch, her own terror rendered her a silent, horrified audience. She was threatened, told that if she ever spoke a word to anyone, the same would happen to her, or worse. And she believed it. She sat, a prisoner herself, and watched as her sister was systematically, scientifically destroyed. The abuse became more intense, more sadistic, more creative. Sylvia was forced to eat spoiled food. She was forced to insert a Coke bottle into her body. She was burned over and over with cigarettes. Gertrude would press her lit cigarette into Sylvia's skin, her face calm, her breathing shallow and wheezing, as if she were merely putting out a butt in an ashtray. The girl who had smiled so tentatively in photographs was disappearing. Her body was a roadmap of bruises, burns, and welts. Her spirit was being methodically hollowed out. And then, Gertrude moved her to the basement. The basement was the final act of dehumanization. It was a damp, dark, unfinished room with a single, bare bulb. The walls were dirt. The floor was cold concrete. This was where Sylvia was to live. She was locked in, isolated from the world. The only time she was allowed up was when Gertrude or the children wanted their entertainment. She was starved. They would give her crackers, but only if she admitted she was a prostitute. They would deny her water. They withheld access to a bathroom, forcing her to soil herself in the corner of her prison, which only gave them another reason to punish her for being filthy. The other children still came. They would go down the rickety wooden stairs, their footsteps a drumbeat of approaching doom. They would find her huddled in the dark, and the games would continue. It was down here, in the cold and the filth, that the most infamous act of all occurred. The psychological and physical violation reached its apex. Gertrude, along with Richard Hobbs, decided that Sylvia's sins needed to be made public. They needed to be carved into her very being. Using a heated needle, they held her down, and they branded her. They seared a message, letter by letter, into the skin of her stomach, a permanent, searing proclamation of her guilt. "I'm a prostitute and proud of it." This was the ultimate act of power. They were not just hurting her body, they were rewriting her identity. They were branding her, not as a human, but as an object of their disgust, their rage, their pleasure. She was no longer Sylvia Likens, 16-year-old girl, sister, daughter. She was a thing, a prostitute to be used and discarded. The end came not long after. In the final days, Sylvia was almost unrecognizable. She was suffering from third-degree burns, severe malnutrition, dehydration, and a host of infections. Her body was giving up. She was slipping away, her mind finding the only escape it could. In her final, lucid moments, she apparently overheard the children planning what to do. They were getting scared. They knew they had gone too far. They talked about leaving her in the woods to die so they wouldn't be caught. Sylvia knew she was going to die. She reportedly whispered her last, heartbreaking words to a boy who had shown her a rare, fleeting moment of kindness, giving her a sip of water. "I'm going to die," she said. "I know I'm going to die. You've got to go and get help. Go call the police." He didn't. On October 26, 1965, 3 months after she first walked into that house, Sylvia Likens died. She died on a filthy mattress in a dark basement. The official cause of death was a subdural hematoma, a brain hemorrhage compounded by shock, skin damage, and extreme malnutrition. Her body was a testament to 3 months of sustained, unrelenting human cruelty. It was only then, after Sylvia was dead, that the spell was broken. Gertrude's daughter, Paula, finally made an anonymous call to the police, telling them to check on a sick girl at the house. The police arrived. The first officer on the scene, the one who walked down those basement stairs and found Sylvia's body, would be haunted by it for the rest of his life. He found not a sick girl, but a corpse, a body that looked like it had been pulled from a concentration camp. He went upstairs. The house was quiet. The children were there. Gertrude was there, and Jenny, silent, broken Jenny, was finally able to speak. The trial that followed ripped the city of Indianapolis apart. The entire community was forced to look in the mirror and ask, how? How did this happen on our street? How did dozens of children participate, and not one single adult, not one teacher, not one neighbor who heard the screams intervene? The prosecutor, Leroy New, was so shaken by the evidence that he famously said in his closing argument, "This is the most terrible crime ever committed in the state of Indiana." Gertrude Baniszewski was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. She was, against all odds, paroled in 1985 after serving 20 years. She changed her name and died quietly in 1990. The children, Paula, John, Hobbs, Hubbard, all served time, but their sentences were short. They went on to live their lives. But Sylvia did not. The true horror of 385 East E East New York Street is not a ghost story. There are no phantoms that walk the halls. The house itself was demolished, erased from the earth as if to scrub the memory clean. But the horror remains because it is a story about us. It's a psychological blueprint for how evil is manufactured. It shows how a crowd can surrender its humanity to a single, twisted will. It shows how normal people, normal children, can be turned into monsters, not by possession, but by permission. It shows how easy it is to look away. The intimate, somber horror of Sylvia Likens is the chilling realization that the only thing separating a quiet neighborhood from a torture chamber is the willingness of good people to speak up. In 1965, on a street in Indianapolis, no one spoke. And in that silence, true evil was born. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, in the flat, fertile heartland of Indiana, there lived a woman who was a walking, breathing contradiction. She was a mother, a landowner, a businesswoman. She was a pillar of the Norwegian immigrant community in LaPorte, and she was, perhaps, the hungriest creature that patch of earth had ever known. Her name was Belle Gunness, but she wasn't always Belle. She was born Brynhild Paulsdatter Storset in the cold, rocky village of Selbu, Norway. And the stories say the darkness started there. They say she was a girl of sharp edges and a strong back, a girl who, while attending a local dance, pregnant and unmarried, was attacked by a man. He kicked her so violently in the stomach that she lost the child. The man, a son of a wealthy local, was never punished. And something in Brynhild, they say, curdled. It froze. It turned to iron. She came to America, as so many did, to reinvent herself. She shed her old name like a snakeskin and became Belle. She was a big woman, tall and strong, nearly 6 feet and weighing over 200 pounds. She was not a classical beauty, but she had an air of authority, an air of solid, earthy capability. She married, she had children, she opened a business. And then the fire started. Her first husband, Mads Sorensen, died. The official cause was an enlarged heart, but the timing was convenient. He died on the only day that 2 different life insurance policies on his name overlapped. Belle collected the money, a small fortune. The local doctor, who had treated Mads just the day before, found the death suspicious. He found the man's symptoms to be more in line with strychnine poisoning. But before an autopsy could be demanded, Belle had him in the ground. With the insurance money, she moved. She took her children and moved to LaPorte, Indiana. And there, she bought a farm. It was a good 40-acre farm with a house, a barn, and, most importantly, a large muddy hog pen. She was a widow, a landowner. She married again, this time to a local butcher named Peter Gunness. The ink on the marriage license was barely dry before Peter's bad luck began. First, his infant daughter from a previous marriage died, alone in the house with Belle. Then, a few months later, Peter himself met a tragic end. A heavy sausage grinder, Belle explained to the sheriff, had fallen from a high shelf and split his head open. A terrible, tragic accident. The town sympathized, but Peter's family did not. They were suspicious. They knew Peter was a careful man, and the story made no sense. But before they could intervene, Belle's farm mysteriously burned. Not the whole thing, just a section. And she collected, once again, on the insurance. She was a woman who, it seemed, profited from every single tragedy that befell her. Now, she was alone. A comely widow, as she would soon style herself, with a large, beautiful farm. And she was, she claimed, lonely. This is where the true, dark fairy tale begins. Belle Gunness, the lonely widow of LaPorte, began to write letters. She placed ads in the Lonely Hearts columns of newspapers all across the Midwest, in Chicago, in Milwaukee, in Minneapolis. She aimed her words like a hunter aims a rifle, targeting the hearts of men she knew had no one. Norwegian immigrants, farmers, laborers, men with no local family, men with calloused hands and full bank accounts. Her ad was a masterpiece of temptation. Personal, comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman of means who would like to join me in sharing my home. No triflers. And they came. Oh, how they came. They came like moths to a gas lamp. One by one, they would pack their life savings into a trunk, buy a one-way ticket to LaPorte, and dream of a comfortable future with a strong, capable Norwegian woman. The pattern was always the same. A man would arrive at the station. He would be met, sometimes by Belle, sometimes by her new farmhand, a twitchy, infatuated man named Ray Lamb Fear. The man would be taken to the farm. He would be seen having dinner with Belle and the children. The neighbors would wave, and then he would vanish. If anyone asked, Belle had a ready answer. He wasn't the one. He was a trifler. He had business in Chicago. He went back home. He left. He always just left. But the men's trunks, they always stayed. And Belle's bank account, it always grew. One of these men was Andrew Hagelin, a farmer from South Dakota. He and Belle exchanged loving letters. She called him dearest. She begged him to come to her, to sell his farm, to bring his cash, and to build a new life with her. "That is the nest we want, dear," she wrote, in a letter that would later be found. "Come prepared to stay forever. Andrew something." He sold his farm, drew his money, and told his brother he was going to Indiana to marry the widow Gunness. He arrived in LaPorte, and he vanished. His brother, Osley Hegeline, was not a man to let things go. He wrote to Belle. Belle wrote back, sweet and concerned. She hadn't seen him. Perhaps he'd been waylaid. Perhaps he'd been tricked. Osley Hegeline didn't believe her for a second. He told her he was coming to LaPorte. He was going to find his brother, or he was going to the police. Belle knew her time was running out. The trap was about to be sprung. Then came the farmhand, Ray Lamphere. He was a small, troubled man, and he was hopelessly, dangerously in love with Belle. He was her hired man, her confidant, and, many believed, her lover. But Belle was growing tired of him. He was jealous. He was needy. He knew too much. She fired him. Lamphere, in a jealous rage, began to tell stories around town. He told people that Belle was a hell bitch. He told them that no one who visited the farm ever left. He told them to watch her, that she was no good. The townspeople dismissed him. He was a drunk, a scorned lover. But Belle knew. Lamphere was a loose thread that could unravel everything. She went to the police and had him arrested for harassment, for trespassing. She tried to have him declared insane. She was, in her own words, in mortal fear of him. This was Belle's genius. She was planting a seed. She was painting a picture of a terrified widow, stalked by a maniacal farmhand. She was setting the stage for her final act. On the night of April 28, 1908, the Gunness farmhouse exploded in flames. It was a hellish inferno. A fire so hot it melted the windows and cracked the foundation. By the time the sun rose, the house was a smoking, blackened pit. The townspeople rushed to the scene and their hearts broke. In the ashes of the basement, they found 4 bodies. 3 were clearly Belle's adopted children. The 4th was an adult woman, charred beyond recognition, and she was headless. The town of LaPorte mourned. Their poor widow, their tragic Norwegian mother, had been murdered along with her children by the monster Ray Lamphere. He was arrested almost immediately. The case seemed open and shut. But there were problems. First, the body of the woman. A local dentist examined the charred jawbone. He said definitively that the dental work did not match Belle Gunness's records. He was ignored. Then there was the size. The body was measured. It was significantly shorter and lighter than the formidable Belle. This, too, was explained away by the fire. And then there was Osley Hegeline. He had arrived in town looking for his lost brother, Andrew. He heard Lamphere's ravings. He heard the stories. He looked at the smoking ruins of the farm, and he told the new farmhand, a man named Joe Maxon, start digging. Start with the hog pen. And so they dug. What they found was not a farm. It was a boneyard. It was a charnel house. It was a human butcher shop. The ground gave up its dead, one horrifying piece at a time. First, in the soft earth of the hog pit, they found a burlap sack. Inside were the dismembered, decomposed remains of Andrew Hegeline. But he was not alone. The farm became a gruesome excavation site. As the men dug, they unearthed a nightmare. They found bodies and pieces of bodies everywhere. Under the chicken coop, buried in the garden, in the soft mud near the lake. The farm was a mass grave, fertilized with the bones of Belle's suitors. They found Ole B. Budsberg of Wisconsin. He'd come with $500. They found Thomas Linbo, who had left his wife and children to be with Belle. They found Henry Gerhold, who had arrived with his life savings. They found dozens more, men, women, and, most horrifyingly, children. They found the remains of her own stepdaughter, Jenny Olson, who the town thought had gone away to college. Each body was found in the same condition, dismembered, often decapitated, and doused in lye to speed decomposition. The town of LaPorte, the entire world, was transfixed in horror. This was not a woman, this was a monster. A female Bluebeard. A Black Widow. She was an ogress, a giant from a dark tale who lured men to her castle and ate them one by one. The official body count stopped at 40, but everyone knew there were more. The ground was poisoned with them. But what of Belle? And what of the headless body in the basement? Ray Lamphere, on trial for his life, finally told his story. He said the body was not Belle's. He claimed it was a house. Help, a stranger Belle had lured to the farm just days before the fire. She had murdered this woman, drugged her own children, and set the fire herself. She had planted the body as a decoy. He told them that, just before the fire, Belle had him drive her to the train station, carrying heavy trunks. Trunks, he said, that were filled with the money she had stolen from her victims. She had withdrawn her entire bank account, and she had vanished. Was he telling the truth? A scorned man trying to save his own neck? Or was he the key? The jury didn't buy his story, but they couldn't convict him of murder. They convicted him only of arson. He died in prison a year later, but not before giving a deathbed confession to a preacher, confirming it all. Belle, he said, had killed them, all of them, and she had escaped. The mystery of Belle Gunness was complete. The headless body was never identified. Belle herself was seen for decades afterward. She was seen in Chicago, in San Francisco, in Mississippi. A woman in Los Angeles, wanted for a different murder, was rumored to be the aged Belle Gunness, but it was never proven. She had dissolved back into the American landscape. She had come from nothing, built an empire of murder, and then, like a ghost, she was gone. The farm in LaPorte is quiet now, but the ground remembers. It remembers the weight of the bodies. It remembers the hunger of the hogs. And it remembers the heavy, 6-foot shadow of the woman who fed them. The story of Belle Gunness is not a ghost story. It is, perhaps, more terrifying. It is a story of a monster who was all too real. A story that proves that the darkest, hungriest, and most evil things can sometimes be found, not in the shadows, but hiding in plain sight, in a simple farmhouse with a welcoming smile. You like ghost stories, don't you? I mean really scary ones. Not the ones in books, not the ones in movies. I'm talking about the real ones. The ones that have rules. The ones that come with a challenge. The kind of story that a local tells you. Their voice a little too quiet. Their eyes daring you to laugh it off. In Indiana, if you drive far enough west, you'll find yourself near the town of Brazil. It's a small, quiet place. But if you ask the right people, or maybe the wrong ones, they'll tell you where to find the real darkness. They'll tell you about a place just outside of town, a place called Carpenter Cemetery. But nobody calls it that. To everyone who knows, to everyone who's ever felt that cold spike of fear in their gut, it has another name, 100 Steps Cemetery. It doesn't look like much in the daylight. It's just an old, forgotten graveyard on a hill, choked with weeds and tilted, moss-covered stones. It's the kind of place you'd drive by and not even notice. But the heart of the place, the thing that gives it its name, is a long, crumbling stone staircase. It's steep, and it seems to just disappear into the trees at the top of the hill. The legend is simple, but don't you dare mistake simple for safe. The legend is a dare, and it has rules. Rule number 1, you have to go at night, not just any night. You have to be there at the stroke of midnight, not a minute before, not a minute after. This is when the veil, or whatever you want to call it, is thinnest. This is when the place is awake, so you go. You park your car on the gravel road. It's so dark out here. There are no street lights, no house lights, just the sound of the wind in the trees and the crunch of your own feet on the gravel. You get out of the car, and your flashlight beam cuts a weak little cone in the blackness. You can smell the damp earth, the smell of old stone and decay, and you see them. The steps, they look longer than they did in the day. The stone is slick with moss, and the shadows twist and dance, making you think you see things moving in the corners of your eyes. But you're here now. You came all this way. You have to do it. Rule number 2, you must climb the steps, and as you climb, you must count. You have to count every single step, out loud. Your friends are behind you. Maybe one of them is filming on their phone, their nervous laughter sounding way too loud in the silence. You put your foot on the first step. 1. The sound of your own voice is a shock. 2. You keep climbing. 3, 4. The air gets colder. You can feel it. It's not just a normal night chill. It's a heavy, pressing cold that sinks into your bones, makes the hair on your arms stand up. 12, 13, 14. You're starting to breathe a little harder. The steps are steep. You tell yourself, that's all it is. 27, 28. Did you hear that? A snap. A twig. A twig. It was probably just a raccoon, right? But you stop. You shine your light into the woods. The tombstones look like crooked teeth in the darkness. You see nothing, just shadows. Too many shadows. Keep going, your friend whispers. You keep climbing. You keep counting. 49, 50. You're at the halfway point, and you feel it. A change. It's not just cold anymore. It feels like static electricity in the air, a low hum you can feel in your teeth. You're not alone. You know it. You know it. You want to run back down, jump in the car, and peel out of there, but you can't. You're halfway. You have to see it through. 61, 62. Your voice is shaking now. You're trying to keep it steady, but you can't. 77, 78. A new feeling. You feel sad. A wave of just, crushing, bottomless despair washes over you. It's so strong, it almost makes you sit down right there on the steps. It's the smell of old, wet wool and something else, something like grief. So old it's turned sour. You push on. You're almost at the top. The hill crests, and the steps level out onto the cemetery proper. 97, 98, 99, you take the last step. 100, you made it. You're standing at the top, on the flat ground, breathing hard. Your flashlight beam rakes across the tombstones. You let out a laugh, a shaky, relieved puff of air. See? 100. Exactly, just a stupid story. Your friends are laughing too. The tension is broken, for a second, but you're not done. You forgot about the most important part of the dare. Rule number 3. You have to go back down, and you have to count again. You turn around. The staircase looks different from up here, plunging down into a black pit. You take a breath. Okay, let's go. You start the descent. You count, but you're faster this time. You're cocky. You just want to get back to the car. 1, 2, 3. You're moving quickly, almost jogging down. 20, 21. Wait. You stop. You shine your light at the step. What number was I on? 21, I think, your friend says. No, I think I was on 24. You're confused. It's dark. It's fine. You keep going. 35, 36. It feels like you've been walking down for a lot longer than you walked up. The steps seem longer. 50, 51. The air is cold again. But it's not the sad cold from before. This is an angry cold. This is an ice pick in the back of your neck cold. You feel a prickling sensation, like you're being watched. Not just watched, judged. 73, 74, you're almost at the bottom. You should be, but you're not. The steps just keep coming. 89, 90, you're running now. You're stumbling down the last few, your heart hammering against your ribs like a trapped bird. 98, 99, 100, you land on the gravel path at the bottom. You're panting. 100. See? 100. Dude, your friend says, his voice pale. He's pointing his phone's light back at the steps. You missed one. You luck. There, right at the bottom, is one more step. A step you didn't even see. A step that wasn't there before. You counted 100 on the way up. You counted 100 on the way down, but you missed one. Or maybe you counted 101. Or 99. The point is, the number was wrong. And that's rule number 4. If you get the number wrong, if you miscount, or if the steps themselves trick you, he appears. And that's when you feel it. The temperature drops. It doesn't just get cold, the air dies. The sound of the crickets, the wind, everything. It all goes silent. It's a vacuum. You turn around. And he is there. He is standing at the top of the hill, at the top of the 100 steps, just where you were standing moments before. He is the ghost of the cemetery's first caretaker. He is a tall, dark shape. He doesn't look like a person. He looks like a piece of the night that's been cut out and stood upright. He is a shadow with form. You can't see his face, but, you know he is looking right at you. You are frozen. You can't scream. You can't move. Your flashlight flickers and dies. The legend says he is the guardian of the cemetery. He is the one who counts the souls, and he has just counted you. He doesn't like to be disturbed, and he hates people who can't count. He doesn't move. He doesn't rush at you. He doesn't have to. He just raises his hand. And that's when it happens. The vision. He doesn't show you a ghost. He doesn't show you a monster. He shows you something far, far worse. He shows you, in your mind, brighter and more real than the dark cemetery around you. You see it. It's a flash, a glimpse into your own final moment. Maybe you see a flash of chrome and twisted metal, the smell of gasoline. Maybe you see a sterile white hospital room, the rhythmic electronic beep. Slowing, stopping. Maybe you see a dark alley, a face you don't recognize, a sudden, sharp pain. He shows you in perfect, unavoidable, agonizing detail exactly how you are going to die. It lasts for 1 second. It lasts for an eternity, and then he's gone. The air rushes back in. The crickets start their song. Your flashlight flickers back on. Your friends are screaming, "What's wrong with you? What did you see?" You can't answer them. You can't tell them. You just run. You scramble into the car, fumbling with the keys, and you burn rubber on that gravel road, and you don't look back. You go home. You try to sleep, but you can't, because the dare isn't the scary part. The climb isn't the scary part. The ghost isn't even the scary part. The scary part is this. The old-timers, the ones who tell the story, they say the caretaker's vision isn't a warning. It's not a possibility. They say it's a receipt. They say he doesn't just show you your death. He seals it. He locks it in. And from that night on, you are no longer walking toward a life of possibilities. You are walking one step at a time toward that one specific, unchangeable end. You've been counted. So, go ahead. Go to Brazil, Indiana. Find the old Carpenter Cemetery. Wait until midnight. I dare you. Go climb the 100 steps. Just try not to miscount. Every building has a memory. Every wall absorbs the human energy poured into it. In the heart of Indianapolis, there is a place where the collective sorrow of nearly a century and a half remains trapped, refusing to dissipate. This is not the haunting of a single victim. This is the echo of an entire city of forgotten souls. This is Central State Hospital. It began, as all nightmares do, with a vision of hope. When the hospital, originally named the Indiana Hospital for the Insane, first opened its doors in 1848, it was a beacon. It was built upon the principles of moral treatment, light, air, pleasant surroundings, and compassionate care. Its sprawling campus, a self-contained town of brick, iron, and manicured lawns, was meant to be a refuge, a place to heal broken minds. But hope, like plaster, cracks and crumbles under the weight of time and neglect. The 19th century gave way to the 20th, and the hospital's patient population exploded, vastly outstripping its capacity. The gentle philosophy of moral treatment was slowly strangled by overcrowding, underfunding, and institutional fear. The refuge became a prison. The promise of healing gave way to the reality of warehousing. Imagine the sheer volume of suffering held within those walls. Over 146 years, Central State Hospital housed every form of human agony imaginable. The epileptic, the developmentally disabled, the elderly with dementia, the severely traumatized, and the merely eccentric. All were thrust together, crammed into wards that were perpetually short-staffed and desperately grim. The building itself became a maze of suffering. The wards were dark and sterile. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, medication, and hopelessness. Picture the soundscape, the unending cacophony of moans, screams, distant laughter that held no joy, and the constant, rhythmic shuffling of hundreds of feet pacing uncarpeted halls. This sound was the hospital's heartbeat. The treatments evolved from compassionate care to terrifying, cutting-edge experimentation. This was the dark dawn of modern psychiatry. Patients were subjected to ice-cold baths intended to shock the system into submission. They were strapped to gurneys and blasted with high-voltage electroshock therapy, their bodies seizing and shuddering under the force. And then there was the ultimate violation, the lobotomy. In the hospital's later years, the frontal lobe, the very seat of personality, of thought, of self, was severed. These procedures, sometimes numbering a dozen a day, turned troubled, tormented individuals into compliant, empty shells. The very humanity of the patients was surgically removed, and the ghost of who they once were was left to wander the halls of their own skull. But the sheer, statistical magnitude of death is what truly stains the land. Thousands of individuals died within the hospital's confines. They died from illness, from old age, from accidents, and sometimes from neglect or violence. And the hospital, desperate to dispose of the dead bodies, buried them on the grounds. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, were interred in the hospital cemetery, their resting places marked only by small, numbered concrete markers. So many were buried that entire sections of the hospital, a former parking lot, a stretch of overgrown grass, sit atop the forgotten dead. Their very names, their identities, were lost to the hospital's bureaucratic indifference. They are simply numbers in the Indiana soil. The hospital was a self-contained world, a terrifying microcosm. Beneath the main campus, a vast, oppressive network of steam tunnels and utility corridors ran like cold black arteries. These were the hospital's hidden veins, used to transport supplies, personnel, and perhaps the bodies of those who died in isolation. These tunnels, perpetually dark, dripping, and smelling of damp earth and rust, are where the energy of the place is most condensed. They hold the deepest secrets. When the hospital finally, mercifully closed its doors in 1994, it didn't end the suffering. It simply silenced the official record. The patient files were moved, the staff dispersed, and the massive institutional buildings, the pathology lab, the administration building, the sprawling wards were abandoned. But the memory remained. In the years that followed, before the main complex was renovated, the vacant buildings became magnets for urban explorers and, eventually, paranormal investigators, and they found, unequivocally, that the hospital was far from empty. This is not a traditional haunting. You don't encounter one sad woman or one angry man. You encounter a collective. You encounter the ambient despair of 1,000 people. Investigators consistently report the same environmental phenomena, a bone-chilling cold that permeates certain rooms, regardless of the outside temperature. A cold that feels less like weather and more like the absence of life itself. They report the sudden, overwhelming scent of ammonia, the smell of the wards, and the metallic tang of blood in the old operating theaters. And the sounds. The sounds are what break people. Investigators capture disembodied voices, not just single words, but snatches of conversation, low and frantic. They hear the sound of heavy, unseen restraints clanking on the floor. They hear the unmistakable sound of screaming, echoing from empty concrete rooms. Screams that sound less like fear and more like pure visceral pain. The walls are not reflecting the sound. They are emitting it. In the old pathology building, where autopsies were performed and the dead were cataloged, it is common to experience profound feelings of illness and nausea, as if the physical trauma that defined the patient's last moments is leaking into the present. The tunnels are the worst. Venturing into the dark, wet corridors beneath the campus is to walk through the institutional memory of fear. People report being scratched. They report hearing footsteps rushing up behind them, only to turn and find nothing but the blackness. And they report the feeling of being touched by invisible hands. Cold, desperate, grasping hands, as if the forgotten dead are reaching out for the only thing they lack: recognition. The ghost of Central State is the institution itself. It is the combined misery of every life that was broken, every mind that was silenced, and every body that was buried without a name. It is a massive psychic sponge, saturated with nearly 150 years of despair, torment, and involuntary confinement. Today, parts of the site have been redeveloped, a hopeful attempt to cleanse the space. But the original, imposing brick structures, the massive, skeletal remains of the institution's darkest period, are monuments to the thousands who suffered there. They stand as a silent, monolithic reminder that sometimes the true horrors of the world are not fabricated by demons, but by humanity's own capacity for cruelty, neglect, and forgetting. The spirits here do not want to be saved. They want to be remembered. And when you visit the site, when you stand near those old barred windows, you feel their endless silent demand for acknowledgement. You hear the phantom heartbeat of their collective sorrow, and you realize the terrifying truth. The hospital is closed, but the haunting is permanent. It is sealed into the stone, woven into the soil, and it waits patiently for anyone who dares to walk the grounds and listen to the endearing, echoing chorus of the long-forgotten dead.